Hello and welcome back to On Air. I'm Klara Syrewicz. In case you thought the US, the EU, China or the Middle East were the places where things happen, set your sight on the Caucasus once again. These are small countries but with no small stakes. In the second part of our program, we'll give you a bear hug just in time for elections in Romania. Before we get going, let's commiserate with Ukrainian lawyers who, despite a third appeal, couldn't convince the EU's General Court to put a trademark sign on the phrase, and I'm quoting, "Russian warship, go f*** yourself." This was uttered by a Ukrainian soldier in response to a Russian warship ordering border guards on Snake Island to surrender. Unfortunately, that now iconic phrase has been used and abused by Chinese market forces, the same ones that manufacture killer drones for Russia. The sentence appears on all forms of merchandise without the Ukrainian border guards or the state being able to either stop it or take advantage of it themselves. But the EU court views this much like it did other slogans such as Black Lives Matter or Je suis Charlie. Plus, it has deemed the sentence too vulgar and aimed at war profiteering. War profiteering, since we can't even let them use long-range missiles in a timely manner or throw a yacht at them from frozen Russian assets to compensate for immense losses, we could at least let them sell T-shirts. As you can see, the post-Soviet world is a complicated affair. It's a bit like trying to follow a George R.R. Martin novel. You can't grasp what is happening in one kingdom without reading all the chapters on another. So here we are. Last week we talked about Azerbaijan and its very disheartening COP conference, but we failed to mention the other convoluted thread to this story. Let's now talk about Armenia. For years, Moscow's alliance and defense pact with Armenia, where it had military facilities, including an airbase, deterred Azerbaijan from using force against its neighbor, even as Russia sold weapons to both sides. But Moscow's relations with Armenia tensed in 2018 when Nikol Pashinyan, a former journalist, led street protests and was elected prime minister at the expense of a long list of pro-Russian leaders. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan was forging closer relations with the Kremlin. Considering Armenia has more citizens abroad than in the country proper, and that most of its diaspora lives in the US or in other democracies, their influence on the country's politics leans pro-West, or pro-Balenciaga, surgery and Ozempic. If you're thinking about the Armenians, we're all most likely to know. Anyhow, back to Game of Thrones. During last year's war, when Azerbaijan captured the breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh and tens of thousands of ethnic Armenians fled the offensive, Russian peacekeepers present on the ground stood aside, clearly siding with Azerbaijan. Pashinyan lambasted Russia for not averting the crisis, to which Russia ominously replied that he was making a massive mistake. Pashinyan then said it had been a mistake to rely on Russia to protect his country and held joint military drills with US forces while pledging to make Armenia's defense sectors more interoperable with NATO structures, which he did with a little help from the US and, of course, Azerbaijan's second arch-enemy and Armenia's premier ally, France. And now for the final affront. This September, the Vice President of the European Commission held talks in Armenia about visa-free travel to the EU for Armenian citizens, as the country considers the possibility of joining the bloc. Of course, if Armenia were to move towards the EU and away from Moscow, it would be good, right? Yeah, let's stick it to Azerbaijan and Russia. Well, unfortunately, things are a little bit more complicated. Much like the former US First Lady, whose naked pictures recently surfaced on Russian state television to gloating commentary from the program's hosts, Armenia has a past. Oh, and I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but you go, Melania. Show them the middle finger, tell the Russian warship to, Anyway, Armenia has cavorted with pretty dodgy partners before, and that can cause a lingering problem for its accession ambitions. Despite the separation leaning towards divorce, putting a restraining order on Russia is proving difficult. Russian border guards who were stationed in Armenia since the fall of the Soviet Union withdrew only earlier this year. Armenia still belongs to the Russian-led CSTO military alliance, even though its membership has been effectively frozen since May, when it stopped paying its dues. In September, Armenian prosecutors claimed that Russia had trained 6 insurgents to stage a coup and overthrow Armenia's government. They were allegedly taken to the Arbat military base in southern Russia, taught to use weaponry and given monthly salaries of about 2,250 euros. I love the assumption that 6 guys who are paid the average monthly wage of a German low-skilled worker could topple a government. Armenia is pretty small, but Russia used dozens of people to grab power in Montenegro in 2016 and still didn't succeed, so the lesson clearly didn't sink in. Are you ready now for another plot twist? Here enters the Persian suitor. That one is ethnically questionable, so more like this. Yes, Iran cares deeply about Armenia. Iran's ambassador to Armenia hails from the Revolutionary Guard, the country's economic and security elite. The Blue Mosque in Yerevan, run by Iranians and home to their cultural attaché, is a well-appointed spy hub where agents have been active for over 20 years. Iran has used Armenia as a transit point for the sale and procurement of weapons or sanctioned materials. It even exploited local airlines as fronts for their own planes carrying Shia militia fighters or military equipment from Pakistan and Afghanistan to Syria. In July, a whistleblower alleged that Armenia and Iran had secretly signed an arms deal worth nearly €500 million, which is about 1/3 of Armenia's defense budget. Whether true or not, another infrastructural cooperation agreement was officially signed between the two countries to the tune of around $3 billion. Given the length and extent of their contacts, Armenia might have a soft spot for Iran, and that may imply concessions. In the context of military cooperation, Iranian intelligence could gain access to Western weapons that were sold to Armenia, hello France, and which are currently used by Ukraine. Obviously, no one needs reminding that Iran is actively supporting Russia in this war. Finally, considering Armenian citizenship is easy to obtain after just 3 years of residence, the EU might want to reconsider those visa promises, lest Armenia even unwittingly become a Trojan horse for Iranian servicemen hungry for some European travels. And there's the final yellow straw, and that's Donald Trump. His policy in the Caucasus, as in the rest of the world, might lean isolationist, so no more security consultant dispatched to post-Soviet states, or long-term strategies aimed at pulling those states away from Russia's influence, unless he wants to hurt Iran, but my guess is he will leave that to Israel. Like Melania, Donald Trump just might not care. Is it possible for a European country to make brown bears the focus of a national election? And you thought the US specialized in first world electoral issues like the death of a squirrel. Well, bears aren't just the topic of the day in Romania. They also ventured into domestic debates in Slovakia and international spats between the Czech Republic and Hungary. What to make of this? Find out in this report.
In Slovakia, the government led by Robert Fico is advocating for changes to streamline the process of culling bears near human settlements. Fico's party argues that existing regulations are overly restrictive, leaving communities vulnerable to increasing bear attacks.
People should not live in fear in their own communities.
The proposed legal amendments, framed as necessary for public safety and property protection, have become a key talking point for the administration.
The question is whether it was really about protecting and ensuring peace and quiet for the residents, or whether the real motive was actually to please the hunters.
Critics view the government's rhetoric as a strategy to consolidate rural support by emphasizing immediate safety concerns while downplaying the ecological complexity of the issue.
Abusing such tools is clearly a populist move, the goal of which is to enter the election campaign, to instill fear.
However, environmentalists and opposition figures are pushing back, warning of potential ecological fallout. They call the move short-sighted and say it ignores the long-term environmental consequences of culling such a large number of bears. Romania, with one of Europe's largest brown bear populations, is similarly grappling with bear-human conflicts. Following a series of fatal attacks, including the tragic death of a 19-year-old hiker in the Bucegi Mountains in July 2024, the government has drastically increased the annual bear cull from 220 in 2023 to 481 in 2024. Romanian Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu has assured citizens that culling efforts will focus on high-risk areas, with President Klaus Iohannis echoing these sentiments, pushing for decisive measures.
If we want to continue to have healthy tourism in Romania, we have to realize that we cannot let people be killed by animals. We have had too many incidents where people are injured or killed. It cannot continue like this.
In both Slovakia and Romania, bear management has become a symbol of government responsiveness to rural voters, turning an ecological crisis into a politically charged issue. Especially that, in Romanian folklore, the animals are believed to fend off evil spirits. As debates rage on, the question remains: can these countries balance human safety with ecological preservation, or will short-term political considerations leave lasting damage to their wildlife and ecosystems? For now, the answer seems as fraught as the bear trails themselves.
And we are back with today's guests, John Todd. Hello, John.
Hello.
It looks like the European far right has found a new electoral vehicle, and that's bears and the dangers they pose. And those dangers are being contrasted with the kind of meek, eco-friendly, undecisive attitude of mainstream parties. And I wanted to ask you, is that really electoral manipulation, or is that an issue that needs addressing urgently?
Well, I was saying what we've got here is a situation where the scapegoats escape bears. As we heard just a moment ago, look, we've got bears do pose a problem. We had that poor teenager killed in Romania less than 5 months ago. And there are well-founded fears about these safety concerns. There are also fears about the local tourism industries that can be impacted by this, potentially driving customers away. And in a number of ways, I can understand local communities that voice concerns about safety are also on a broader scale. It's certainly an emotive issue, and if you can pin those fears around bear attacks to an apparently failing administration, then you've got the recipe for a very powerful campaign. Certainly in Romania, the government has more than doubled the annual cull of bears. It did it almost immediately after this tragic death to just over 480 animals a year. Now this has upset environmentalists, but played well with parts of the electorate. Whether it'll stop the attacks is another question. There are still plenty of bears around, and the cull may not reach the rogue animals that people are concerned about. So what I'd say is we're seeing an electoral manipulation of an issue that does need addressing.
Mm-hmm. The issue of bears is indeed a key topic of Romania's upcoming elections, even though bears are asleep now. And it's a key topic, especially for rural constituents. However, there are tried and tested methods that are meant to prevent predation or attacks. Why are these not working? I mean, are they too expensive? Is the number of animals too high? What has happened?
The number of bears have increased considerably over the past couple of years. But bears are officially protected in Romania, where the government estimates there's something like 8,000 brown bears roaming the countryside, which is the largest population in Europe outside Russia. The hunting quota, which I mentioned a moment ago, stands at 481 bears can be killed every year. That rose from 220 the year before, and a very lowly 140 the year before that. But animal welfare experts and environmental activists say the soaring quotas just may not solve the problem. They say the conflict is between people and bears, and it's fueled by human behaviour. And they say there's a lack of political will to tackle what's a very touchy subject. So we're talking about money here, and we're talking about the interests of tackling something that you may just fall on deaf ears. But bears are essentially being pushed from the forest, which is, the environmentalists are saying their natural habitats being suffering deforestation, and there's a shortage of food. Romania is a major exporter of berries and mushrooms, the main food stock for bears. So environmentalists frame it as a battle between business and bears. And really it's a question of who's got more of a voice here. The key really is more education. Don't go around offering sandwiches, unwanted sandwiches to bears on the trail, because that's what I understand is happening. There are animals now waiting to be fed on the path side.
Maybe people encountering those bears are just throwing whatever food they have at them and then running away, because it's a kind of, the bear is standing there and saying, I like your jacket, give me your wallet.
Well, I'm going to say, but there's another element. We've doubled the bear cull. There's a business here as well, and the cost of killing a bear, it's going to cost you €8,000 to go and kill your own bear, depending on the size of the bear.
That's kind of depressing. But it's not just bears actually causing an uproar. It's also wolves. They were nearly driven to extinction in the last century. Then they gained protected status. However, unfortunately for them, they attacked Ursula von der Leyen's Commission president's favorite pony. And since then, she has been pushing for new laws that would strip them of their protected status. And she is being followed by other groups protesting against certain species like beavers or cormorants. Can this be read as a general pushback against the EU's green policies?
Yes. I'm going to jump in there and say yes. Look, in the wider context, the EU's plans for a greener future are under fire. They're being hunted down, crushed by herds of cows, run over by petrol-powered cars and being sprayed by pesticides. We saw in June in the EU elections that it was the Greens and the Liberals, those pushing for a faster, greener future. Those are the ones that suffered at the elections. They lost some between them, the two sort of core groups, lost something like 40 seats. And the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, is also apparently trying to run away from her parts of her green legacy. I mean, that's reported by Politico recently. But what we've seen in the EU and in the UK is the hard and centre-right politicians seeking to drive wedges between voters that champion green policy. They're fuelling and feeding on a sense of grievance. They argue that climate zealotry has gone too far and that the costs are simply too great. And in rare cases, they even suggest that climate change is just nothing but fantasy. Now, the European Commission's President, Dolly, well, that was killed by a wolf in 2022, and she's had these large carnivores in her sights ever since then. But I'm just going to go back to bears, because they've not only loomed large in Romania, don't forget they had a significant presence in the US elections when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was outed as the author of a rather disgusting prank some 10 years ago, where he'd posed a dead bear cub he'd transported there along with a bicycle, suggesting the bear cub had been the victim of a hit and run.
Right, yeah, that was the famous bear cub, but there was an uproar about that. I wonder why there was no uproar about his brainworm. I mean, it died. I mean, maybe of hunger, That's an issue that needs addressing. Anyway, thank you, John. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you. And next week, we will tackle a different issue, semiconductor minerals and the politics that surround them. See you soon.